Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 1 Kings, the 10th chapter. And this is mainly dealing with the time, where the Queen of Sheba ended up coming to visit Solomon, right? At this time, his fame had gone out, and all throughout the world, people were pretty much talking about the wisdom of Solomon and all the things that were going on here. But even so, or even more so, the magnification of the name of the Lord. All right. So let's get into it. This is the book of 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord Yahweh, she came to prove him with hard questions. All right, when you go into the hard questions, basically like enigmatic sayings, things that are like riddles or very difficult, or at least thought of generally to be very difficult and hard to understand, dark sayings, these kinds of things, and even questions in general, to test and see if this if the rumors at this point in her perspective were true or not. Verse 2, and she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, right? And this train being, you can think of it as an entourage or, like a large force. And by force, you had people, but also you had a lot of goods, as it's going to describe here. With camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. Right, so you can imagine they spoke for quite some time, as she probably had a lot of things on her mind, to say, all right, let's ask him. Let me ask him and see, what does he think about this? And usually in situations like this, person comes to try and, you can imagine like the Queen of Sheba, for example. She might come there. She might have one or two pressing things on her mind that's supposed to be like the primer, right? To say, okay, let's see if he really is as wise as they say he is. So she might ask one or two questions, and then based on the response, she might then say, wow, okay, all right, let me go and ask some more. And then before you know it, she's asking questions she didn't plan on asking. She's asking anything that comes to mind that can, that she can just throw at him, because she's in awe now of this wisdom here. And as we read on in the scriptures, you'll see that she even says that herself, about how she was surprised at that. Verse 3, and Solomon told her all her questions, right? He gave her answers to them all. There was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom and the house that he had built, so when she had heard, she had experienced it for herself, the wisdom of Solomon, right, and the house that he had built, right, the temple, and his own palace, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, right, the condition, how they were arrayed, right, where it is that they stayed, all of these things, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up onto the house of the Lord Yahweh. There was no more spirit in her. Okay, which is to say that she just, she was what's the word? Speechless, right? But there's another phrase, a terminology for this that's escaping me right now. But you get the point. And she said to the king, it was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thine acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit, I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Today you would say, like, I didn't even hear the half of it, right? Like this, what I heard didn't even come close to what this actually is. Now today, information travels a lot by the internet, for example. Back then, it was more like a word of mouth, people traveling, but information still spread. And you can imagine that it spread so much to the point where even over here, over where the Queen of Sheba came from, she was able to hear word of that. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are thy servants, or happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord Yahweh thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord Yahweh loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king, to do judgment and justice. Meaning the Most High, by choosing somebody like Solomon to fulfill that role, it was because the Lord loved Israel to give them such a wise ruler. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, which is a lot of gold. You can look, we're going into that talent, a good amount of times. You can look into how much a talent is, and then you do the math of 120 of that and see how much that is. But it's a lot. And of spices, very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. All right, meaning that at no other time, right, was there brought so many spices as at this time. And contrary to those certain books, certain other information out there, they try to say that King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had they had intercourse or something like that, but that's not the case. Verse 11, and the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. And as we went through in the previous chapter, right, as to the location of Ophir, which we believe to be the Americas, all right, where they traveled to and from, mainly to get these exotic, the gold and the the different resources. And it's interesting. I mean, it kind of makes sense too, right? Because when you deal with, I believe, is it the movie 1492, right? You have like Christopher Columbus. He mentions in there about how it's written in the book of Ezra that the 10 tribes of Israel, right, the northern kingdom were over there. But also remember that a place like Puerto Rico, right, as we say it, but I think it's really Puerto Rico, right? A rich port. Why was it that they named, that region that? Because it had a lot of riches, a lot of resources, a lot of gold, a lot of these things. And when you read a lot of these books, one example is I think it's the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere. That's a good book, and that book has a lot of good information that supports the truth of the fact that the Native Americans that were here do in fact go back to the northern kingdom of the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes. Okay. And in there, it goes into how they had a lot of gold, a lot of riches, a lot of resources here, which when the conquistadors, as they call them, right, the Europeans, the Edomites, basically, when they came over here, they saw that. And then they ended up pillaging the village, so to speak. So, it makes sense that it would be in the Americas that King Solomon's navy, along with Hiram and his men, would come to get those resources, the gold, and so on. Anyway, it says, and the king made also, and verse 12, and the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of the Lord Yahweh, and for the king's house harps also and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were seen on to this day. And King Solomon gave unto the Queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So whatever it is that she asked, he gave it to her, in addition to the things that he already gave her, the gifts that he already given her as like just like a general, gesture of, you have a guest, that kind of thing. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 636 talents of gold, which is a lot. Beside that he had of the merchantmen, and of the traffic of the spice merchants, and of all the kings of Arabia, and of the governors of the country. Because not only was King Solomon king, but also the position, right? When you look geographically, the area in which Israel was a very good position to be in, because trade, right, and which that's what merchants do, right? They trade. In order for people in the south to access the goods coming from the north, they need to go through the middle point, the Levant, but more specifically where Israel is today. They call it, or in secular history, it was called Coal Syria. Likewise, in order for those at the north, like Syria, I think even the Hittites, right, which were, when you look at the Hittite Empire, is somewhere around the Asia Minor in there, or close, but it's north of Israel. So those, the Assyria, right, those regions, in order for them to get the resources from the south, where like Egypt is or Arabia is, they would need to go through Israel, right, to go up north. And so this made Israel very lucrative, having controlled those routes, trade routes, and even just, regular passages like the Via Maris, right, the Way of the Sea, which is really starting along the coast of the, where you would have the Gaza Strip area, and then you also have the King's Highway, which is more on the right side, right? So all in all, Israel controlling this territory put them in a very advantageous position. And it was also part of the reason why during the 6 Syrian Wars, there was this fighting between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, but it would always be one side would take over Israel, then the other side would come and it would also take over Israel, because having that middle point was a very good spot for them. So here during the reign of Solomon, or King Solomon, having this point, this vantage point, and being in rulership here, it made us a lot of money. Verse 16, and King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold, and the targets going into like shields, and 600 shekels of gold went to one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pound of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And you can read about what that house is, in the previous chapters as we went through when King Solomon was in the process of the building. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind. And there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. So you can imagine a throne, a lion on the right, a lion on the left. Verse 20, and 12 lions stood on the one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. So you imagine there's 6 steps leading up to King Solomon's throne, and on each step, on the right side there's a lion, on the left side there's a lion, not an actual living lion, but a statue. And then you go up the first step, 2 lions, second step, 2 lions on each side, all the way up to the 6th step, which has 12 lions. Verse 21, and all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon, meaning the riches were so much that silver wasn't even considered something of high value, right? Remember, these precious metals and so on, a lot of the value is based on the rarity, right? So if you look at the hierarchy of precious metals and if you compare like how rare it is, like a stone versus versus compared to another one, right? Some stones, gems as they call them, are obviously more expensive than others because they're harder to find. So, so in this case, because there was so much gold and so much riches, silver was like nothing. Verse 22: For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram, which I believe Tarshish is Spain, over there, right? Which is where Jonah tried to flee to from the border of Israel. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks, which makes sense as well, right? Because when you read in the Apocrypha, and it talks about the journeying of the northern kingdom, right? Because remember, the northern kingdom had been taken captive out of their land and deported into regions in Assyria. At this time, the Assyrian Empire was in power, right? The time that I'm speaking about. And when the Assyrian Empire went down, the northern kingdom, right, the tribes of the northern kingdom, communed among themselves and decided to come to the Americas. In Second Ezra, the 13th chapter is referred to as Arsareth. So they traveled down, I believe, the Euphrates, right, and then they came down through the Horn of Africa and then so on, right, came to the Americas. But the scriptures tell you that it was the way of it was about a year and a half. So going and right, we're seeing here that the gold and the silver and all of these, the peacocks and the apes, were from Ophir, which is America or the Americas, at this time, where Hiram and King Solomon's navy would be going to get these resources. So if it takes about a year and a half to get there, well, a round trip would make sense that it would be about 3 years, right? From when they set out, a year and a half to get there, they gather the resources, and then they come back a year and a half to get back. That would make sense for it to be about 3 years, like once in every 3 years. As it says, came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year. So there was a certain amount that they brought yearly. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king at Jerusalem. So some of the horsemen were, remember, there were certain cities that he had his horses and so on be at. So some of the horsemen would be there, and some were with the king at Jerusalem. Obviously, if any need arose, it would make sense that you would have some at Jerusalem there. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. Which means what I said before, right? Because there was so much of it, it was likened onto like how today you would be walking and you'll find a stone or a pebble. That's how common it was to find silver. Verse 28, and Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn. And the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. Right, so there's a certain trade, right, amount that they would basically accept those at. And a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria did they bring them out by their means. See, so the horses and chariots will come from Egypt, which is south. They would be received at, in Israel, and then be sold, or given, in this case, in a transactional way to those that needed it or wanted it in the northern parts, which is like Syria and, like it says, the Hittites and the Syrians that needed it. So going back to the example I was given, because of the position where Israel was, if the Egyptians had something they wanted to trade or sell, and it was going up to to Syria or any of those areas up there, it would have to go through Israel, which will make Israel like that hub, and also that would bring in a lot of wealth. So anyway, that brings us to the end of the book of 1 Kings, the 10th chapter. Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.